Hello, my name's Tim Fisher. Today I'm going to show you how to paint flowers in acrylics. The subject I've chosen are pink roses. Let's start by applying some paint onto the surface. I've squeezed out lemon yellow and quinacridone red, and they're the two colours I'm going to use as the base coat. I'm going to apply it with a palette knife, and I'm going to use again this teardrop shaped knife. So here goes, let's start to get some paint on. I find the quinacridone red gives it a slightly pinker appearance than the cadmium red. Right, so I'm going to focus on getting the flowers worked in. One of the things you have to watch is that if you're not careful, the reds tend to take over. So I've cleaned my knife and then gone for a slightly cleaner yellow and then just picked up a bit of the red and flicked that into the side. This rose here, the one that's facing us, I'm working that in a spiral fashion. So I'm working the palette knife around, because roses do tend to grow in this sort of spiral fashion. So if we can mimic that with the knife, it gives us a good start for when we want to build up the further layers of colour. There's a nice little bud here on the right. I'll just pop a little bit of pigment on there. The roses that are around the periphery, they want to have just slightly less attention, so they want to be nice and loose. But as you can see, as I work the pigment into the surface, I can still see my outlines because I've worked it onto the surface with a fibre tip pen. Again, this one that's facing away from us, just working the texture in with the palette knife. They're quite useful for that. The one thing you have to watch is you don't put the pigment on too heavily, otherwise you end up waiting quite a long while for it to dry. We do want the background to be moist, so that when we put the next layer on, some of the yellows pick up and make the background slightly green. And say, once you've done this a few times, you'll be very good at plastering your bathroom wall. Scrape the knife over it now, just to take any high ridges of paint off. And that's the first stage. That's the palette knife work finished now on this painting. So what I'm going to do is change over to a brush. I'm going to use a 1-inch flat nylon brush to start with. And I've squeezed out cerulean blue and white onto a fresh layer of the tear-off palette. What I'm conscious of is that I don't get too much of the colours that I was previously mixing going into those colours. So here we go, I'm going to start painting in the background. It's slightly tacky still, so some of those yellows are going to creep into the blue, so we're going to get some greenish tinges as well, which all helps to give that impression that there's some background foliage sitting behind the roses. I'm mixing the colours a little more this time because I've got a brush rather than a palette knife, and just starting from this top right hand corner, probably start with a little bit more white so we give the impression there's a bit of light coming from this side. I want to work quite quickly because I want some of the wet paint below to pick up and just turn that blue slightly green in places. It's also quite nice to leave some of those reds, oranges and yellows that we've created on the first layer showing through. So it just adds that little bit of interest and temperature. Just add a little tiny bit of water because the paint's just started to stop flowing. So a little bit of lubrication there just helps to get that moving. But we don't want to add too much water. Otherwise it'll go quite transparent and we'll have difficulty covering the first layer. So it's just a little bit of a balancing act. And there you see we've picked up a nice yellow streak there from the slightly damp underpainting. Some of the leaves that I've drawn in, some I've painted over and some I'm painting around, so I'm doing that fairly arbitrarily. And then some of the leaves I can paint back in. It just adds that little bit of variety to the background leaves. Just cut in there where the light's breaking behind the petals. Want to get quite a broken edge on these flowers. We want a nice loose type of painting. I don't want the flowers to be too precise. So it's really, we're suggesting roses rather than doing a botanical painting of them. I think that's always more fun. We can get a much more painterly effect by not concentrating too hard on the shapes of the blooms. Trying to just break up some of the brush strokes as well. When I curve the brush around a leaf, it does leave quite a strong mark, so it's just useful sometimes just to break that up a little. We don't want too many of the marks echoing the shapes of the leaves in the background. I'm only roughly putting these colours in at this stage. There's some leaves to go in over these blues. So that's the second stage of the painting complete now. I've squeezed out Windsor Violet, Lemon Yellow and French Ultramarine Blue. With that in addition to the cerulean, that gives me a nice range of colours to get my greens. Pure lemon yellow and cerulean gives you quite a vivid green, but once you start adding in the ultramarine and the violet, that tones it back a little. I picked up a smaller brush. This is a flat nylon brush and it's a 3/4 inch. And just use the chisel edge to start to create stems and leaves. So just flick the brush around. I'm trying not to overmix the colours on the brush as well, so that some of the individual colours appear in the painting. The other nice thing you can do is create the spine of the leaf just by painting either side, like so. Not all of the leaves have to be painted to look exactly like leaves. Sometimes you can just get away with just a simple brush stroke, because we can always come back with the background colour and paint that around the marks we've made. So this stage it's also trying to work around the rose petals and just find the different edges. We can also use the chisel end of the brush just to suggest any stems that are sitting in the background. Again, at this stage, it's not really important to get everything exactly right. We've still got plenty of time to come back and work into this. Put a little bit more violet into the mix here, just to get more dark in this lower area of the painting. And then just a little bit of neat yellow onto the top, so we start to get some highlights occurring, but not being too precious about it. I find sometimes if you paint the leaves really quickly, they often look better than if you've tried very slowly and carefully to describe their shapes. That action of just not caring too much sometimes produces quite interesting results. There's a little bud here, so that requires a stem, just a little leaf coming off it, maybe one crossing over there. And then just a few more marks down in this bottom corner. I think the violet's a lovely colour. Just keep popping those little bits of violet in. It really gives it a nice feeling.